Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In terms of time and space, perhaps we are as far off from where this book describes action to being here in Jaipur. It's about 71 war, 52, 53 years later. In the Bay of Bengal, we are closer here to the deserts of Rajasthan than to the oceans, notwithstanding the rain this afternoon. This is an army stronghold, and we are discussing a Navy book. So thanks to the organizers. But ladies and gentlemen, what gives this session a certain contemporary feel is the fact that the authors of this book are people who have actually participated in that war. Both Admiral S.K. Gupta, or G.G. Gupta as he is called, and Commodore Gurnam Singh are authors. They are war veterans. They participated in the war. They saw it from the front lines. And above all, they're Gallantry Award winners. So ladies and gentlemen, when I saw some of the promos for this fest, William Dalrymple said we have so many Pulitzer and Booker Award winners and so many literature award winners. And of course, we must celebrate that. But I'd like to point out that it is probably rare for a literature festival to have a Mahavir Chakra winner amidst us. It's the second highest Gallantry Award, and I think, it's great honor for the fest to have a Mahavir Chakra and also a Nao Sena Medal Gallantry, as indeed, to my right, Nao Sena Medal Gallantry too. So, take it from me, you're not going to get a more star-studded panel than this through the fest. So, ladies and gentlemen, while I'll ask you to give a standing ovation at the end of it, thank you for giving them this ovation, this chance, and let's dive straight into the subject. So, sir, we'll do it in a flashback mode. Admiral Gupta, sir, we are now, the war is starting, Sansar has been signaled, D-Day is upon us, it's 4th of December. The Karachi attacks had to happen later that day, but it's morning of 4th of December, and you are on the aircraft carrier, raring to go. Just describe to us the action of 71 war as you saw it. You are the first man to take off from Vikrant that morning and go and bombard East Pakistan and create hell there. So just give our audience a sense of what it was at that point of time.
Good afternoon.
You use this meanwhile.
Good afternoon. At the outset, let me say what a privilege and an honor for me to be here.
Little louder, sir.
This is regarding the 71 war. It's a long story, but nonetheless, I've been asked to explain what happened from the 4th of December, the time we arrived in the North Bay of Bengal and ready to attack Cox's Bazar from the air, and then followed by Chittagong, and then there was no end to the bombardment and attacks on shore targets and shipping, gunboats, and any suspicious target from the air for the next 13 days when the war ended. It was something that the Navy was never used to, attacking enemy in their territory. Traditionally the Navy has been guarding the defense installations, your ports, and your sea lanes so that trade flourishes. In this case, it was the first time that the Navy was going to attack both Karachi as well as East Pakistan. So this was the setting. Now what happened was Vikrant had 4 other ships escorting her, giving her mutual protection, both from the submarines and from the air. Now, Vikrant had 2 squadrons, one the jet strike force, other was a reconnaissance come bombardment at night. So I happened to lead the fighter squadron, the jet squadron, the Seahawk squadron, not called the White Tigers, the tie I'm wearing right now. So it was in the morning, and we 8 aircraft took off with a full armament load, and the winds were favorable. I'll come back to the wind story again, if I can. But the winds were favorable to carry out full fuel and full armament. So we was about 110 miles away, and we attacked that, and we came back safely on the ship, and we got a massive ovation on the ship. But then that was the start. Then soon afterwards, 2-3 hours later, we were back on Chittagong. Now, at that time, we didn't know there was no air threat to us. We were protected the fleet from the air as well as against shore targets and submarines. So this carried on for the next 13 days, and I believe you me that we succeeded in blockading the approaches to East Pakistan so that nobody could interfere in this war. No help was forthcoming from the sea, and nobody could escape from the land. So having sealed North Bay of Bengal, and the army and our own army and air force were then attacking from the lands and from the air. So the war ended very fast. Much less time was taken for the surrender, only 13 days. And it was a surrender in which 90,000 prisoners of war were taken. And it was a recognized surrender, and I think the world recognized the fact that it was a record-breaking of all sorts, because even the American Navy, who were threatening to interfere and stop the war, before they could even, they landed up in the Bay of Bengal, but still far away south of Sri Lanka, and could not then interfere till the war ended. So that was a win-win situation for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, as he said, nobody could come in from the land, could escape from land, and nobody could come in from the sea. So the Navy effectively strangulated East Pakistan in the Bay of Bengal. Commodore Ravi, who is here, he has written about in his blog that when then Lieutenant Commander Gupta came back after the first strike, they were garlanded and he was hoisted on everyone's shoulders. Such was the collective cheer and mood on Vikrant. But interestingly, and now I come to Commodore Gurnam sir, the war was fought for 13 days, the Seahawks flew for 10 days. There were 18 of them which were operational at the beginning, and there were 18 that were operational at the end of the war, 18 out of 18. And the person who kept them in that mint condition, despite their flying almost every day, was then Lieutenant Gurnam Singh. So tell us, sir, some of the challenges of keeping those machines, and they were not new. Tell us some of the challenges that you experienced keeping the Seahawks in that condition, and give us a sense of the feeling on the deck when the war was happening.
Thank you, Arvind. Wars are not pleasant, like surgeries, but sometimes surgeries as well as wars, nations have to resort to cure the bigger ills and promote health. 1971 war was one such war where our nation went into correct a situation which was affecting the body politics of our country. And it was a job done very well. Now, coming to answer the question, INS Vikrant was an aircraft carrier. Now, those who have some sense of naval history of aircraft carriers. This aircraft carrier was ordered in 1941 during the Second World War. But then it was not made. It was made for 60% and kept. And then we purchased it, and we also bought aircraft, which was known as the Seahawk fighter ground attack aircraft. We have purchased 74 aircraft in 1960s. And by the time the 1971, we were left with 33 aircraft. Other aircraft have been lost for fair wear and tear and accidents. Out of these 33, they were aged aircraft. They were about to be written off. They were to go out of service. To go to war, we needed 18 aircraft. So it was to the credit of the Indian Navy and their organizations that out of these 33 old aircraft, we produced 18 Seahawks operationally fit, and those which trained Vikrant and our pilots from July 1971 onwards till the war started on 4th of December 1971. And by the time the 16th of December came, it was a 13-day war, Pakistan had folded up. Pakistan had gone on its knees and surrendered. As Admiral had just mentioned, there are the 93,000 prisoners of war, one of the biggest surrenders in the history. We also broke Pakistan into two. East Pakistan became Bangladesh, an independent country, and threat from that part of the globe disappeared forever. So this was the war. And it is for the glory of those men on board INS Vikrant and the rest of the Navy that they created this history.
So as he has rightly brought out, and as many people know, that this was a war that not only created, as it is said, it's a war that not only created history, but it also created geography. Now, not many people, the Army's role is very well known. Not many people know what the Navy did in the war. And this book fulfills a vital gap because the Navy came to the party in a big way. In many ways, it was the Indian Navy's finest hour. And one reason you probably had more than 90,000 prisoners of war was because they could not escape through the sea. However, sir, things were not hunky-dory 6 months, 1 year before. Vikrant was limping a little. And more importantly, from your perspective, your squadron was not fully ready, equipped, even 6 months before the war. So how challenging was it for you to get everyone back, get into the rhythm? It's not easy to do that. So just tell us some of the challenges that you had while preparing for the war and getting your squadron ready. Your pilots were scattered, your aircraft were probably not completely in the best condition. How did you manage to put that all together in a matter of 5 to 6 months?
Well, that's a fact. A year before the war, Vikrant had begun to have serious problems with her boilers. And the result was that she was a limping ship which could not exceed 14 knots. Now it's designed to do 25 knots, and it was only 14 knots that was delivered by Vikrant. So pronto, she sailed back to Bombay for repairs, and for 1 year it lay in limbo with the boiler still non-operational. And the lead time, the manufacturers told us in the UK, would take 3 or 4 years to get the new boiler, specially manufactured for Vikrant, and then put it back in position. So from all points of view, it appeared that we will never be embarking on Vikrant again, because 3-4 years is a long time for a ship to be laid off. And with the Vikrant going off the front line, the squadrons also lost their importance. It became a training squadron. from an operational squadron, all the operational pilots of mine were posted out to do their compulsive sea time and staff appointments in the Navy. And I was landed up with just myself, who was deck qualified as a squadron commander, and 2 or 3 others. The rest of 15 were all brand new pilots, just qualified for flying with their wings from the Air Force, and required at least 1 year of intensive flying for them to learn how to fly off the deck of Vikrant. With that kind of position, I never thought, when I was ordered to bring 6 aeroplanes from Goa to Bombay, to Madras, at that time, Vikrant was sailed out from Bombay because they found that it was too risky a place to keep Vikrant, even if though she was non-operational. You can imagine if Vikrant was attacked from the air by Pakistan, or for underwater saboteurs, or any such thing, and Vikrant went down, how demoralizing it would be for the Navy and for the country. So she was sailed away, and I thought, just to humor her, she came to the Bay of Bengal, away from the Pakistan's air attacks and the eyes. But one submarine was following Vikrant all the way, Ghazi. You must have heard of INS Ghazi. Well, she had the endurance enough to follow Vikrant for several months and then bring her to sink her. So that was the aim, and we appreciated that. So Vikrant's movements, though she came non-operational, absolutely without any aeroplanes, our aeroplanes flew off from Madras, excised with her, with totally new crew of 1,300 people on Vikrant. My squadron itself had no, apart from 2 or 3 of us, were not qualified enough to fly off the deck either. So I thought it's just humoring Vikrant that we have come all the way for 4, then finally 6 aircraft is all that we could muster. And so we were flying off with Vikrant, and we were all learning to fly from the air. At the same time, Vikrant's communications with us aircraft also so new, and so they also had to train, and we had to get confidence from Vikrant that they mean business. At the same time, they hadn't known us, so we also had to build in a lot of confidence that yes, we are capable of operating from the deck. But you know, it's this funny thing that Naval Headquarters had banned the operation of all aircraft from the deck of Vikrant as a result of her limping and not producing sufficient wind for the aircraft to operate. And it so happened that we could not launch aircraft from the catapult because it required steam from this 4th boiler, which was non-operational. Same time, we could not land on Vikrant and hook on the wires because the speed wasn't enough. The wind speed wasn't enough on the deck. Those of you who are aviators will understand what it means to have wind on deck. The ship steams into wind and creates an artificial wind together with her own speed that adds up to 25 knots. Now, we just couldn't do that. And that's the reason why, as explained by the Commodore earlier, 3 days we couldn't fly off East Pakistan because there was 0 wind. And Vikrant could only do 14 knots, and we required 25. So that was the state of Vikrant, and the squadron is also denuded of pilots and aircraft. Would you believe it that I had only 3 aircraft serviceable, operational for training 18 pilots in Goa, and I myself was flying 1 sortie a month. So we were totally non-operational. And the reason for that was that the spare parts of the Seahawk aircraft had to be ordered from the UK, and they had to be specially made for us because the aircraft manufacture had been stopped 10 years earlier. So we were trying to revive the Seahawk aircraft for this war. But none of this was going to be seeming to be possible until the Chief of Naval Staff came, and he came with his operations staff, and he gave us a lecture on Vikrant at sea. And that's when I came to know that they're very serious about flying on Vikrant and perhaps taking part in the war. But things moved very rapidly after that. After the go-ahead by the Chief of Naval Staff through our Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at that time, they spent a lot of money getting all the spares in record time. And to cut the story short, it was only till end of October that I got 15 pilots who I knew very well, flown with them earlier, and they were brought in from all over the country and to join me on Vikrant. So we have 15 pilots and 18 aircraft, raring to go by about the first week of November. We had in these months from August to November, just 4 months to train, and those 4 months we had only 25 flying days. Now getting back to shape and ready for war in 25 flying days, with aircraft all and new pilots and the old pilots arriving back on board only by middle of or end of October. So it was an uphill task, but the big factor in our favor was that Vikrant, a mothership, we called her mother, we had total confidence in her. Whatever orders we were given by the ship were followed meticulously, and the confidence built up over a period of time. And so by November, the fleet was formed with Fleet Admiral coming on board and his 4 or 5 ships, including Vikrant. And that's at the time we went to war soon thereafter, within a month. But I wanted to explain to you that we had this constant threat of the Pakistan submarine lurking in the Bay of Bengal. And it so happened, because Vikrant's movements were all very secret, that we on the ship didn't know where we would be the next day. Only the commanding officer would get orders to go where, and he had to go. So that paid dividends, because the enemy submarine was always 24 hours behind time. So whenever Vikrant had been visited any port, like Madras or Vizag, or Port Blair and Andamans, but the submarine was following us one day later. And it so happened that she blew herself up in the defense, in hoping to get Vikrant. They laid the mines off Vishakhapatnam, and the mines themselves blew them up in shallow waters. So that's the story of how we were literally from a limping navy came back to fight a war, and very, very successfully.
Admiral Gupta relates things in a very, very matter-of-fact way, and that's the tone throughout in the book. He doesn't tell, for example, how he came back in a plane riddled with bullets from an anti-aircraft gun. He doesn't tell that at one point of time he was nearly asked to land on the sea because the hangar of the Vikrant didn't come up, only a last-minute thing. And I think he was almost running out of fuel when he landed. So there are several interesting stories. But what he's telling you essentially, ladies and gentlemen, is that naval aviation is no joke. Now, for those who are not from the Navy here, please remember that you are in naval aviation, landing your aircraft not on an airfield that is long and fixed, but you're landing on a moving airfield. You're landing on a moving airfield that's also rolling and pitching and, in stormy seas doing all sorts of things. And you're doing that often in the dead of night with absolutely nothing to navigate you. Sometimes in war, you got to keep those precautions. So that's the sort of thing that naval aviators do, which is why they say naval aviators are great people, because they always take off in headwinds. So it's when the wind is against them, they take off. But this is an interesting story. How did India become a naval aviation power? We are a naval power, we are a blue water navy. But how did, in 1947, we were a navy with less than half a dozen sloops, 1,000 tons. By 1961, less than 15 years later, 14 years later, we had an aircraft carrier navy. And 75 years after independence, we are actually building an aircraft carrier in India, an indigenous aircraft carrier, the Vikrant. That is the cover of their book. So this, from the old Vikrant to the new Vikrant, from being nothing to being an aviation navy, this book also tells the story of that. It's a history of the 71 war, but it's also a nice pocket history of naval aviation. So Gurnam sir, I want you to weigh in on this. How did the book happen? You lived through, you're a pioneer yourself. How did you see naval aviation grow? And what made all of that possible?
In 1971, most of us on board that aircraft carrier, our mean age was about 30 years. Somebody was 32, 34, 35, some were a little younger. I happened to be exactly 30 years and 1 month at that time. 52 years later, if you add 30 and 52, you get a figure of 82 or 83. I am now 83, Admiral is 86, I believe, sir, 86?
87.
87. So sometimes after the war happened, I retired. I felt that we have fought other wars with Pakistan, but none of the wars were decisive. They were left halfway, Pakistan claiming they won, and we claimed that we won, but it was never a decision. 1948, 1965, subsequently also. But 1971 was one war where there was no doubt as to who won. India had won, and we had demonstrated to the whole world that we have won. Pakistan had surrendered. I wanted to, it was in my mind to find out as to why, when earlier wars, we were not able to decide why in this particular war we had decisively win. This question was in my mind, and I wanted to write about it. And this is the story of the book, as to why we won. The reason is very simple. When the Britishers were ruling us, they had two types of navies. One was to defend India as a nation, as a country, and other to have a small subsidiary force to look after the naval interests around the coast and things like that, but nothing to do with the defense of India. Defense of India was given to the Royal Navy, the British Navy. When the British left, the defense of India also came to India. But they had trained our Navy only to do the coastal work, look after the lighthouses, look after the boats, this and all that. Nothing to do with the offensive and defense of India. No offensive role. This story continued till 1971, and even at the national levels, the policy was so designed, whatever was the policies which were introduced by the Britishers, and Indian Navy continued to be assigned the role of this small time operator, and that is why we did not participate. 1971 was the first war where Indian Navy decided to take on the full role of a defense force, and with full offense. So those who look at the history, they will see that till 1971, while we had the aircraft, ships, aircraft carriers, we had never used them to the full potential. And therefore, we did not know what a ship can do. You can have a ship, it looks very nice, you go on board, have a sail, go to sea and come back. But what a ship can do during the war, this we did not know. So we did not know our own strength. It was the 1971 war which actually revealed to the Indian Navy itself, not only to the Indian Navy itself, and also to the nation, to the public, for you people, what Indian Navy can do. Indian Navy controls the sea, dominates the sea. And when you read, those who decide to read the book, the first page of the book, it tells you The whosoever controls the water, he has the power. And this comes from the old. You see? Whosoever controls the water will have the power. And this important lesson we had forgotten. 1971, India and the Indian Navy learned this very important lesson, and the Indian public also learned this lesson. Because in earlier wars, it was the Army and the Air Force. If you see the three armed forces as a triangle, triangle is a very strong figure. You cannot move. If you have a square, you can move, but if you have a triangle, triangle is a very strong figure. But two sides of the triangle being the Army and the Air Force, if the Navy side was missing, the triangle is open. And that is what used to happen. In 1971 war, we closed the third side of the triangle. And the result was for all to see. The moment the Arabian Sea was controlled and the sea was denied to Pakistan, Pakistan armed forces and Pakistan ships did not come out of the harbor after that. They refused to fight. They refused to put up a fight. No help could reach them, and they could not come out. No trade could go. The entire trade was absolutely abandoned. All ships which are going to Karachi, they had to take permission from the Indian Navy. Similarly, in the Bay of Bengal, we were controlling both the sea as well as the air. Pakistan could not use the air over the Bay of Bengal, and Pakistan could not use the water of the Bay of Bengal. No help could reach them. They could not come out. As a result, and the West Pakistan could not help them. So they were totally felt absolutely helpless, and in 13 days they folded. Those who read the book, you'll find that the foreign nations, America had decided to intervene, and they sent the 7th Fleet to intervene in the war. And they had come very close, another 2 days of sailing, and they would have been in the Bay of Bengal. But it is to the credit of the Indian Navy and those who were there at that time that they closed the war in 13 days. Foreign nations, they could not intervene. They had nothing to do after that because Pakistan had surrendered. So this is something which I think we ought to remember. So kindly, if you read the book, you will see these things.
I was telling him, don't tell everything so that, people can buy the book. Now, ladies and gentlemen, however, he makes a very, very important point that navies don't grow overnight. It takes some time for them to grow. It takes some time for the navies to themselves realize how they can best be utilized. And it takes some time for the country as a whole, for the government, for the political, bureaucratic apex to realize that. And it's happening so well now. You see the Indian Navy deployed. You see its exploits, for example, in the Red Sea, off Somalia, fighting pirates one day, rescuing ships the other day. You realize that the Indian Navy has come of age, and it's probably doing everything that a Navy is meant to do. But a lot of that was built by characters like Gurnam sir, Gigi sir, and a lot of people around them. And ladies and gentlemen, Navy is essentially about characters, about people. So I'll ask one last question to Gupta sir before I open it up for a couple of questions from the audience. He, like I said, he's had an interesting life. One of his other Gallantry Award winner medals, NM, is because he rescued an aircraft from almost being ditched because he had to take off again because the arrestor hook failed. So you have to take off, you don't have power. He was almost going down into the ocean and he pulled it up. Again, you ask him, he'll tell it to you in a very matter-of-fact way. He was also amongst the 2 pilots who flew a Seahawk from Anchorage in Bombay. It's rarely done. At Anchorage, you have very little winds, probably another entry in the Guinness Book of World Records. But one of the most fascinating stories about him, and I'll ask him to tell that in just 1 or 2 minutes, is that log apne shadi mein, barat mein, people go on ghodas. Some people go in a limousine, but there are probably very few people who go for their marriage launched from an aircraft at sea. He piloted his own aircraft from the sea, landed in Bangalore, and got married. So I don't think you can find a more unique shadi than that. So Gigi sir, 1 minute to describe how you got married, and then we'll throw the floor open.
Very appropriate time, because I was only one evening with my new wife. I never saw her again for many, many days. This was 65 war. 65 war in May 65, and our marriage was fixed for 12th May. But the leave was cancelled on the 4th of May, and I was ordered to go back from leave. I was going home to Dehradun to bring the Bharat, but never happened. I got intercepted at Bangalore, and the military police took me back. So what then happened was that those days there was no mobiles, there was telephones also very, very difficult to get by. So telegrams were going up and down, a few of them, and I suggested that, look, postpone the wedding. My father-in-law was a bit superstitious, and he said, no, we won't postpone the wedding. If you can't make it, we'll understand. Next thing that happened was I realized that Vikrant was going to be more likely to be in Bombay than in Goa or Cochin. So I suggested in the next telegram, consider having the wedding ceremony in Mumbai. Promptly came the answer through a helicopter which I received, saying that no, we will stick to Bangalore, and again, if you don't come, we'll understand. So this was the sort of affair. And then the next thing was, they were never sure or when I would be able to come or not, and even the aircraft carrier didn't know. Finally, the Admiral very quietly told the commanding officer Vikrant that to give me an aeroplane to go to Bangalore, get married, and to come back within 24 hours. Now, this is what happened, but actually it was French leave. It is not recorded anywhere because it was not permitted during hostilities. So this is what happened. So when the next flew off, there was no wind. And the wind, I had to wait for the wind to pick up so that I had full fuel to go to Bangalore 400 miles away. So finally, when I got launched, I reached just in time. At 9:30 was the muhurtam. At 9:40 was the muhurtam. At 9:30, I landed up in HAL airport in Bangalore. And there, of course, they hadn't got any messages of mine, so they were all waiting there. And so I got married on time. I can't remember whether I even had a shower or time. For a shower, I was flying overalls. And then came back the next morning, 7 o'clock, I was overhead Vikrant again at 7 in the morning, about 500 miles away, and landed there. I happened to be interviewed that night by Vikrant, and they asked me what did the marriage feel like, and I said it sounded like a picnic to me, to go, just go there and come back. This is the story.
So, sir, as we say in the Navy, you are given leave not for compassionate reasons, but passionate reasons. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have time for probably a couple of questions. What I'll do is, sir, if it's okay with the front people, can I take it to the non-Navy crowd, young people at the back? Yes, there. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
And after that, the gentleman in front of you.
Hello, sir. Could you also emphasize the Soviet naval interference where when the US deployed the US task force headed by the US Enterprise, Soviets deployed warships under the Indo-Soviet Indo-Soviet treaty where they were bound to help India, and they deployed warships and nuclear submarines to help us.
Yeah.
So could you please emphasize?
Got the question? Can we take one more and then we'll... Sir.
Thank you, Admiral Gupta, Commodore Gurnam Singh. My father was involved in the first war, in the 71 war also, as PC Lal. So he and Admiral Nanda were good friends. Now, the interesting thing is, Admiral Nanda, in fact, grew up at Karachi Harbour.
Yes.
His father used to work there.
Yes.
And I know at Chittagong, Kilo Flight went in before the Indian Navy went in, where there was one helicopter and one other aircraft fitted with machine guns. Did that Kilo Flight also help you in the flight into Chittagong when you were attacking, or did you have to do it all by yourself without any help from anybody else? Thank you.
I'll answer that.
So, the killer flight?
As far as the attack on Chittagong was concerned, it's purely our own affair. We had no assistance from anywhere. And we just knew that we were giving targets officially, and we attacked those targets. And some of them were all off the cuff, opportunity targets. But we had no such... but what is true, and perhaps somebody else may want to answer, is that yes, Admiral Nanda was very familiar with Karachi airport.
Yes.
And he had decided before he became a chief that if he were to become a chief, he would make sure that he would attack Karachi. And he lived up to his words.
That's right, sir. He did an interview with the Blitz in 1969 where he said, given another chance, we will, light up Karachi. It's good, I think, Pakistanis did not read Indian newspapers. So otherwise they would have probably known. So the answer to the USSR, if you want, I can take it, or would you like to give?
Admiral Nanda has written a book, and the title of the book is The Man Who Bombed Karachi. So those of you who have interest in this one, I commend that book to you. In our book, we have cited some of the views because the doctrine of an offense, of an offensive attack, it was the brainchild of Admiral Nanda. 1970 naval operations, the credit has to go to him for his doctrine of first offense, hit first and hit hard. That was his offensive. I'll also take this opportunity of this to tell you that the war books are written, well, whenever there is war, there are books written. Of 1971 war, you will come across books. Most of the books you will see have been written by people who are not at the point of war. This particular book, that Guardian of the Seas by Admiral Gupta and myself, it is, to my mind, it is maybe one of the first books or the first book which actually tells you or reports to you from on board INS Vikrant. We have given you day-to-day account of how the war was won, how we were prepared for the war, and what was happening on the ship. So when you read, I personally feel you will actually be able to go on board Vikrant in 1971 and feel for yourself what was happening and how the war was proceeding on the day-to-day basis. It is not a the armed book chair or a chair book. It is not written from the
and it depends on what perspective you want to take on that. Did it help India? Possibly yes, possibly no, because as has been brought out, the enterprise group came nowhere close. They were not even in Bay of Bengal. They went to Sri Lanka. I mean, they were not in North Bay of Bengal where the action took place. And the fact that the Indian Navy and the armed forces finished the action in 13 days meant that, before they could interfere, it was done and dusted. So, and the Indian Navy's orders were clear. Admiral Nanda, famous signal to the captains that if you encounter the US 7th Fleet, please, wish them the time of the day and invite them for a drink. This is in reference to the fact that US Navy ships are dry when they sail. So invite them for a drink was a good proposition. And I think later when Admiral Zumwalt visited India, he said, we need not have worried about this. Possibly some bit of folklore in this, but we could discuss that separately. We got about 5 minutes, so Commodore sir, yes, next to Admiral Bice. No, Abhishek, not you. We got to give sir the chance. So.
Thank you. I am Commander P.K. Roy, who is really gratified today to renew an acquaintance which is 63 years old with Admiral G.G. Gupta. I joined Vikrant in 1961 as she came in from the UK with brand new Elysees and brand new Seahawks. Admiral sir, I wanted to check with you two things. One is, during the 71 war in the Bay of Bengal, a ship called PNS Ghazi was sunk. The other question is, there was an amphibious landing on Cox's Bazar when INS Vikrant was there. Could you elaborate on these two topics?
Yes, of course. I'll be very brief.
Incidentally, I'm also took part in Operation Trident.
Wonderful, sir. So we have another war hero here. Thank you. Salute to you. Sir, we got about 3 minutes.
Yeah. Operation Trident, of course, was the attack on Karachi by missile boats, very successfully done. The bit about Ghazi. Ghazi was, as I mentioned, trailing Vikrant everywhere. And you know what happened, really? Ghazi was enticed to come to Visakhapatnam. An artificiality was created to make Pakistan Navy headquarters be given an impression that Vikrant was sitting inside Visakhapatnam and due to come out. And that message was sent to Ghazi, and Ghazi laid the mines on the approaches and exits to Visakhapatnam. But actually, Vikrant was nowhere there. Vikrant was there in Visakhapatnam a couple of days earlier, and now she was hiding in the Andaman Islands, over 2,000 miles away. So that was the story. That was the fact. And Ghazi blew up on its own. We don't know. It's a bit controversial because there was a ship patrolling Visakhapatnam, and which was periodically dropping depth charges. These are bombs that explode underwater to keep all, to keep it safe, keep the port safe. So in that process, I think either it was sheer coincidence that it blew up Ghazi's mines, which they had laid, and the Ghazi became, had sunk. And all the dead bodies were recovered later, and our divers went down and got the story looking at the charts. So as far as the, what is the other question? A couple of Gurkhas got drowned in that.